Greetings, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. In a few hours, we will probably know the results of the parliamentary elections in the Republic of Moldova, which today are, one might say, on the front pages of the world's leading publications, which are being talked about in the news of information TV channels as one of the most important events in Europe. And here, of course, the question may arise why parliamentary elections, in a small European country, attract such close attention. But because these elections have become another battlefield for Russia and the West. For Moscow's attempts to establish its influence in the Republic of Moldova and prevent its European integration, its sovereignty and independence. More recently, the Kremlin made similar attempts during the presidential elections in the Republic of Moldova to prevent Maya Sandu from being elected for a second term as head of state. And when the presidential elections were lost, it was decided to take revenge on the parliamentary ones. After all, taking into account the constitutional legislation of the Republic of Moldova, the head of state does not have many opportunities to influence the political course of the country if the majority in parliament belongs to forces that do not agree with the course of the president. That is why so many efforts were made to help pro-Russian, anti-European, and I would even say anti-Moldovan forces when these parliamentary elections. Therefore, the Kremlin changed the curator of Moldova for the first time in a decade in the administration of the President of Russia. Not the now former deputy head of the presidential administration Dmitry Kozak was responsible for the change of course in Chisinau, but the first deputy head of the administration Sergei Kirienko, who is increasingly becoming the curator not only of Russian domestic policy, but also of the entire post-Soviet space, and is trying to act much tougher than its predecessors. That is why Moscow has invested such propaganda resources in ensuring these elections. Why? There are several tasks that the Kremlin would like to solve. First of all, Moscow would like to surround Ukraine with a chain of unfriendly regimes that can, of course, look at the West with one eye, and even be part of European Euro-Atlantic structures like Hungary and Slovakia, but in fact block all attempts to help Ukraine and, accordingly, the European, Euro-Atlantic integration of our country. This is how Viktor Orban blocks negotiations with Ukraine on Ukraine's integration into the European Union, and Robert Fico blocks the adoption of new European Union sanctions against Russia. The roles are distributed, and Moldova can have its own role. First, to create tension on the southern borders of Ukraine. Secondly, it is possible to help strengthen the contingent in Transnistria, the Russian contingent, which is still controlled by Moscow as an occupation army in the so-called Transnistrian Moldavian Republic. And, of course, stopping any flow of aid that goes across the border between Moldova and Ukraine is also quite understandable. And understandable goal. And besides, Russia simply does not want to let Moldova out of its own embrace, and this has been happening since the early 90s. When in order for Moldova to remain in the Russian sphere of influence, such levers as Transnistria and Gagauzia were used in the beginning, and then pro-Russian forces in Moldova itself. Politicians were simply bought or tried to use their own corrupt biographies, so that they would have no alternatives in terms of cooperation with Moscow. Therefore, much will depend on how the citizens of the Republic of Moldova vote. Let's not forget that in the last presidential election, a representative of the pro-Russian anti-Moldovan bloc, received the majority of votes in Moldova proper. And only the voices of the diaspora helped Maya Sand to get a solid majority. Whether this mobilization of voters outside the borders of the Republic of Moldova will be as effective now, we will understand soon. But it is clear that if the pro-presidential party fails to maintain a majority in parliament, then a conflict between the head of state and pro-Russian forces is almost inevitable. And it is inevitable that the political course of the Republic of Moldova will change to a pro-Russian one. Even if Maya Sandu tries to resist it. Crisis phenomena are also possible if the authorities see that the election results have been falsified with the help of Moscow by its Russian puppets. But again, we saw how serious the crisis of neighboring Romania was, when challenger Gescu unexpectedly broke out as the winner of the first round of presidential elections. TikTok is a candidate who, of course, was backed by his Russian, and not only Russian, but also right-wing populist sympathizers, who made him an unexpectedly successful virtual presidential campaign. It is unclear whether the institutions in Moldova are as strong and effective as the institutions in Romania to resist such falsification. If there is one, especially in a situation when the former president of Moldova and the main pro-Russian candidate Igor Dodon is already warning about the possibility of mass demonstrations. In the end, it may turn out that the pro-Russian forces are charged by the Kremlin not to win parliamentary elections, but just to destabilize the situation in the country. The paralysis of the Moldovan statehood, which in turn will also help Moscow in the future. In short, the elections are very important from the point of view of the future. Also because, by the way, Ukraine and Moldova are candidates for membership of the European Union together. And if pro-Russian forces come to power in Moldova and try to slow down the process of European integration of their own country, then this can really affect the process of European integration of Ukraine, slow it down not even 4 months, but 4 years. And this is also something that the Kremlin is well aware of, and may also be one of the important goals of this election campaign, and may also explain why a pro-Russian candidate in the Prime Minister's chair of a small European country is so important to Moscow. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it, subscribe to my social networks, to the channels in Patreon, BAME, Coffee, and Donatello, which helps to develop these resources of users of the sponsorship function in YouTube itself. Nerves.